corpus. And so I'm very pleased to first introduce from Aston University, Marton Petyko, Lucia Busso, Sarah Atkins, and Tim Grant, who'll be presenting Operation Heron, a corpus-based analysis of latent topic changes in an abusive letter series. And I believe, Lucia, you'll be starting, is that right? Okay, thank you, Lucia, and over to you.
Thank you. So let me share PowerPoint, if I can. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, that's right.
Great. Okay, thank you everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome back from the break. My name is Lucia Busso. I'm a research associate at Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics, and I will present today together with my colleague Marton, our corpus-based study on latent topic changes in the Operation Heron abusive letter series, which is now in press for corpora. So the paper will be out next year. So before we begin, this being a forensic linguistic paper, I just wanted to give you a brief content warning. The content of the letters that we analyze is extremely racially abusive, and some, although not much, of that linguistic material will be present in this presentation. So Operation Heron was a dedicated investigative team that was set up for the investigation on a series of abusive letters that were sent to individuals in the public eye, including the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown. And Professor Tim Grant was involved in the analysis during 2009. And from his linguistic analysis, he predicted the writer to be an elderly female coming from the south of England with a low level of education, but a proficient writer nonetheless. The resolution of the case came a bit later from DNA evidence, which was extracted by the police from a letter obtained after a Crime Watch appeal was launched in September 9, which resulted in many people from the public to send letters that they had received. And DNA evidence incriminated the then 68-year-old Margaret Walker from Southampton, who was then convicted and admitted in 2012 to having sent more than 500 letters. So the corpus that we analyze is not the total amount of the 500 letters, but just the subset that is in possession of our institute following Professor Grant's contribution to the investigation. So we have 50 letters and 49 envelopes, and I'm mentioning envelopes as well because, as you can see from the image below on the slide, I hope you can see it, sometimes the author adds some additional text on the envelopes beside the usual addressee name, etc. So we coded these letters and envelopes according to the addressee types. We divided addressee types into 3 categories: private citizens, healthcare professionals, especially doctors, and all other addressees were coded as others. And then we coded the letters for date posted, and our corpus spans from January 2007, so the very beginning, until April 2009. The resulting corpus that we have is very, very small. I think our paper is actually longer than the corpus we analyzed, but this limited nature makes it the ideal test bed for the new methodology that we are implementing in this study, because it makes it extremely easy to check the reliability of the computational model that we use and to verify if the qualitative corpus analysis brings some innovative elements to the table. So our research questions are listed below. And generally speaking, we wanted to see what were the main latent topics that could be found inside the series, how do they change over time and across addressees, and which statement made of complaints and demands make up each topic, and how do they change as well. So as I said, this is much of a methodological paper because we are proposing a methodology which can be useful for other works in forensic linguistics as well. And we make use of structural topic modeling and a qualitative corpus analysis and semantic annotation of topic-related concordances. So structural topic modeling is a probabilistic algorithm in the field of text mining machine learning algorithms that clusters co-occurring words across documents into coherent themes, which are called topics. We chose this particular algorithm since it allows to model the data also according to some external covariates, hence allowing for statistical analysis and a more refined analysis of the data. Although it's very underused in both general linguistics and forensic linguistics, there are some works in forensic linguistics and generally forensic science, especially computer science, which suggest its potential usefulness not only for forensic linguistics, but for actual intelligence work. So for this analysis, we selected a number of topics equal 4. The number of topics to be retrieved, it's quite important because it's decided by the researcher, and it has to balance both mathematical fit of the statistical model and ease of interpretation by the researcher. And the topic labels that we decided altogether, the authors, are immigration, politics A, healthcare, and politics B. There are some overlaps in the topics, as is expected, since this is a very small corpus, and all these topics are extremely interrelated in the mind of the author, as you will see during the presentation. And as covariates for the statistical analysis, we used both addressee, so the 3 categories that I was talking about, and the date that the letter were posted. So in this graph, you can see the top 10 words for probability of occurrence for each topic. And you can see there are some overlaps, but overall the criterion of exclusivity is met, which means that high probable words only occur as low probability words in other topics. And now I will very briefly illustrate what the results of the statistical analysis told us. So when we model the data for addressee, we find that healthcare, so the topic of healthcare, is significantly more likely to be addressed to doctors. So it's present in letters that are typically addressed to doctors, whereas politics A is significantly more likely to be present in letters that are addressed to private citizens. If we model the data for date instead, we also have some very interesting consideration, because we see that the topic of healthcare is significantly more discussed in earlier letters from 2007. And if you see on the graph, healthcare is the blue line, and it peaks very early. I don't know if you can see that, but it's August 2007. Whereas political themes such as politics A and B peaks at a later time. So they're significantly more likely to be discussed in letters from 2008 and 2009. So to briefly conclude, we can say that using this algorithm was extremely useful for us and could be extremely helpful for other forensic linguistics works, because it allowed us to find the most prominent themes of Margaret Worker's writings. And we could also model these topics as a function of both addressee types and date. And we found, so to say, the general thematic architecture of the corpus. So the image that comes from this model is that the author starts writing in 2007 letters about healthcare, and she sends them consistently to healthcare professionals in the public eye. So maybe she started writing because of some personal problem which was healthcare related, who knows. However, as time progresses, she moves on to more politically oriented letters that were sent to private citizens. And she also declared in an interview later on that she understands her letter to be political propaganda. So she was doing this to convince people to vote for certain political parties. The topic of immigration does not peak very much. However, it remains steadily present in the letters in the form of racially abusive and anti-immigration language. So using a computational model such as STM, we can get an idea of how the corpus is generally structured topic-wise, but being a machine learning algorithm, this functions like a black box. We do not have any insights of how the algorithm works. So we combine this more computationally oriented method with a more qualitative and in-depth corpus analysis, which investigates the nature of the topics that were retrieved. And my colleague Marton Petyko will take care of that. So thank you very much.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you see my slides now? Yes. Okay. So as Lucia explained, structural topic modeling is a data-driven technique for identifying latent topics in texts, and basically it produces lists of words with a high probability to co-occur. But at the same time, these algorithms don't really tell us much about the nature of these topics. And this is why we decided to run a qualitative corpus analysis to identify the main statements within the topics and describe how the prevalence of these statements changes over time in the letter series. This is in fact also implies that the name structural topic modeling is somewhat misleading, because some argue that these sets of words that the STM algorithms produce are not really topics. They are not necessarily meaningful topics that we can find in the discourse that we analyze. We need to verify that by analyzing the data qualitatively. So this was our methodology for the qualitative analysis. We started with the topic-related words. We collected these from the outputs or the output of the STM algorithm, and we focused on the top 20 topic-related words for each of the 4 topics that we initially identified. So immigration, politics A, healthcare, and politics B. Lucia also mentioned several times that these topics are not completely distinct. There are overlaps. The same lexical items can appear in the individual lists for various topics at the same time. After we identified the topic-related words, we created a list of topic-related engrams. In fact, we created 4 separate lists of engrams for each topic, including immigration, politics A, healthcare, and politics B. And these topic-related engrams were sequences of words within the corpus that included at least 2 of the topic-related words. We focused on 2 to 6 engrams, and the minimum frequency was only 2 because, as Lucia mentioned, this was a very small corpus. After we had the engrams, we created the concordance lines from these engrams. These were text chunks containing a topic-related engram, and we created separate lists of concordance lines for each of the 4 topics, and this is what we analyzed in the qualitative part of the analysis, so the topic-related engram concordance lines. The aim of the qualitative analysis of the topic-related concordance lines was to find the key statements within each topic, and this was done by 3 members of the research group independently. And then through a series of discussions, we came to an agreement and we finalized the list of statements that we identified for each topic. Once we had this list of statements, 2 members of the research group annotated each of the topic-related concordance lines to look at how the prevalence of the topic-related statements changes over time in the letter series. This was a binary coding process. We coded the presence or the absence of various topic-related statements in the concordance lines, and we also calculated the level of inter-rater agreement after the second round, and this showed that there was almost complete agreement between the 2 coders. So let's see the topic-related statements for each of the 4 topics. The first one was immigration. Within immigration, we can see that the author expresses some really strong anti-immigration and racist sentiments. She generally accuses immigrants and ethnic minority people of living off the state rather than contributing to society. And she also accuses immigrants and ethnic minority people of committing criminal offenses, including terrorism. The author also argues that only the English and in her mind only the white English should benefit from the tax collected in England, and finally she also argues that immigrants and ethnic minority people abuse the NHS as either patients or as healthcare professionals. The percentages here show the proportion of concordance lines where a particular statement occurs. So for example, 60.8% means that the statement immigrants or ethnic minority people live off the state occurs in 60.8% of those concordance lines that are related to the topic of immigration. If we move on to politics A, we can see that the statements reveal that this topic revolves around Scottish and English independence. The author argues that Scotland should be an independent country. It should be completely independent from England. And in fact, England should be an independent country as well, particularly an independent country from the European Union. So England shouldn't be a member state of the European Union. This, of course, also means that the author argues that the Scots should fund their own pensions and lifestyle, and they should have their own parliament as well, and England should have its own parliament as well without Scottish MPs. We can see that there are two other statements as well which relate to the role that Scottish-born politicians have played in British politics, and the author has a very strong negative opinion of this. Of course, she argues that the Scots voted for Labour and generally hijacked the British Parliament so that they can exploit the English. We can also see here that the most prevalent, most frequent statement, immigrants, ethnic minority people, and that the Scots live off the English taxpayers, is very similar to one of the statements that I discussed on the topic of immigration. And this also shows that the general conceptualization of society that the author displays is that we have the white English who should have absolute priority, who should have complete access to all services, and then there is everyone else, including immigrants, British-born ethnic minorities, so non-white British nationals, and the Scottish people as well. The third topic was healthcare, and the general argument that the author makes is that the NHS should work in a very restricted way. All the patients should be white English nationals, and all the healthcare professionals should be white English nationals. So everyone else should be included from the services provided by the NHS. In a bit more detail, this means that England should only fund, train, and employ English doctors, and shouldn't fund, train, or employ foreign doctors at all. And the author also argues that this is because foreign or ethnic minority doctors are not real doctors in the first place. Her argument is that only English-trained white English doctors are real doctors, and English taxpayers should receive treatment only from them. There is also a general criticism towards the NHS in the letters. The author argues that the English taxpayers don't receive proper treatment in English hospitals, and English doctors are forced overseas to work. And of course, the author blames immigrants and ethnic minority people for this. And finally, politics B. the last topic. If we look at the topic-related statements, actually these are identical to those I discussed under the topic of politics A, and this is the reason why we call these politics A and B. We recognize that these are essentially variants of the same content topic, and the key difference between the two is quantitative in nature. In politics A, the most frequent statement was that immigrants, ethnic minority people, and the Scots live off the English taxpayers' money. Whereas in politics B, the most frequent statement is that Scotland should be independent from England, and the Scots should vote for the SNP to reach independence. So politics A is dominated by a complaint, whereas politics B is dominated by a demand which relates to the future, a change that the author calls for. As I mentioned, we also looked at the prevalence of the topic-related statements over time. And the key observation that we can make here is that the various statements within the same topic tend to move together. They peak around the same time period. So, for example, if we look at the topic of healthcare, we can see that all the statements within the topic of healthcare are the most frequent in letters sent in January 2007 and in April 2007. And then there is a last peak as well in November 2008, but there is no significant difference between the prevalence of various statements within the same topic. And this applies to all the topics as well. Sorry, I think I was muted for a second. Is that possible, Robbie?
Sorry, that was entirely accidental. I promise. That's not a hint.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I will finish in 2 minutes.
No,
so don't worry.
Please do carry on. That was completely an accident.
That's fine. So the same observation that the different statements within the same topic move together. This applies to all other topics as well. So I will conclude the talk by discussing some of the implications of this project for corpus linguistics and forensic linguistics. When it comes to the implications for corpus linguistics, we think that this project demonstrated that the qualitative analysis and annotation of topic-related concordance lines can help us make sense of the outputs of STM algorithms, which would otherwise work as black boxes. The key argument that we want to make is that STM algorithms on their own are unable to produce meaningful topics. We need to verify that by conducting qualitative research as well. So qualitative concordance analysis is as important or even more important than the outputs of STM algorithms. The main benefit of using STM algorithms is that it produces search terms that we can use to identify concordance lines within our corpus that we can analyze further. The combination of STM algorithm, STM and concordance analysis introduced in this talk can be used for mapping the evolution of topics over time. And this is why we believe that it may serve as a methodological inspiration to other projects focusing on topic changes in other data sets, especially where time is a relevant factor. And this is almost always a relevant factor when it comes to letters from the same author. Regarding implications for forensic linguistic research, we argue that the combination of structural topic modeling and the qualitative analysis of topic-related n-gram concordance lines is a very powerful technique for discovering latent topics, identifying topic-related statements, and detecting latent topic changes in letter series or other texts relevant to forensic linguistics. And one of the benefits of the STM plus concordance analysis technique is that it provides a focused and principled tool for analyzing a macro-level textual phenomenon, namely latent topic change, which can supplement the more traditional analysis of micro-level linguistic phenomena often used in forensic linguistics, such as the analysis of lexis, punctuation, and the word level in general. And finally, discussing implications for forensic linguistic practice, so investigative work. We also believe that the structural topic modeling plus concordance analysis technique has potential use in investigative work as well, as it allows for eliciting hidden, non-trivial patterns in a large set of texts. And it can also pinpoint how the prevalence of these patterns changes over time or across text types. And this can be especially useful when dealing with a large number of texts from one or multiple authors, which also means that there might be a practical use of this methodology in authorship analysis, as previous research has pointed out that stark topic changes might indicate a change in authorship as well. Of course, much more research. I was muted again, sorry. So much more research is needed in this area. Because at the moment, of course, we don't really understand the exact relationship between individual author style and topic changes. And this concludes our talk. Thank you for watching. And I just wanted to mention that the preprint version of the paper based on this project, accepted for publication in corpus next year, is available from Aston Research Explorer. So this is the URL for that document. So if you are interested in further details, this preprint version is available. Thank you for watching again.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Really interesting. I do apologize for those muting issues there. I think we've sorted it out now, though. So we just have a minute or two before we move on to the next talk. We have a question from Bennett asking about why you chose to use n-grams and whether you considered any other approaches. So I wonder if you might want to speak to that for a minute or so before we move on.
Yes, so the main reason why we choose n-grams was that believed that n-grams are better representatives of the topics that the STM algorithm produced than the individual words. So they are closer representatives of these topics. And also there was a practical consideration. We wanted to control for the number of concordance lines that we analyzed within this project. And it was easier to control that number by choosing n-grams than words. So in this case, the other option would have been using the individual words.
Absolutely. And I think we have time. We have a question from Susan Hunston. Did you have a stop list when producing your topic lists?
Yes, we have. So we used, I didn't say that, but we used R to code to build the model, and the package automatically allows you to exclude a list of stop words. We used a particular list of stop words that we retrieved from GitHub that has all the function words of the English language. And we also included in this list the word English. So we excluded the word English just for the statistical analysis, because it's very, very frequent, because the author is of course very focused on the English everything. And then we reinserted the adjective for the qualitative analysis.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We'll move on now. So thank you once again to Marton, Lucia, and also Sarah and Tim, who contributed to that presentation as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Well, we're going to move straight on then to our next presentation. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mark McGlashan from Birmingham City University and Samuel Larner from Manchester Metropolitan University, who will present the language of children's online disclosures of domestic, emotional, sexual, and physical abuse. And I promise that after this presentation, the topic of the talks will get slightly cheerier. It's not going to be quite this sad for the whole day. So thank you, and over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Robbie. So I'll share the screen. Can you see that presentation? Yep. Cool, thank you. So it's just me today. Sam is unfortunately not with us. That sounds a bit more ominous than I meant to sound, but he's not with us today. So I'm Dr. Mark McGlashan from Birmingham City University, where I'm a lecturer in English language, and I'm going to be talking to you about, as Robbie's just said and introduced, the language of children's online disclosures. We're looking at a particular message board provided by Childline, which is in turn provided by the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which is the NSPCC. So yeah, I'll give you a bit of a background to the talk, and then basically get into the analysis, what we've done so far. So this is a bit of work in progress. We've got something coming out soon, but it's still work in progress. As Robbie said, the talk should lighten up soon, but I do have a disclaimer at the bottom of this screen, and there's one throughout the talk. So there is going to be some discussion of violence, sexual violence, and abuse throughout the talk. So do please, yeah, use your own wherewithal. It's not going to be very pleasant. So first, I'll give a bit of background. What is disclosure, essentially, and why we're doing the work that we're doing. Then I'll move on to talk about the data that we're looking at. So the message boards, how they're made up, why we're looking at them, then give a bit of analysis and findings. So the kind of work that we've done so far and some future work, and then some conclusions. Something I wasn't planning to do, but I have done in preparation for the talk, is actually added a little bit extra in. So as I was coming up with the slides and doing the work for this presentation, the government launched a review into sexual abuse in schools following a deluge of information about testimonies of sexual abuse in schools. And this was mainly to do with a particular board, another message board called Everyone's Invited. So there were tens of thousands of reports of abuse, mainly from young women, reported through this website, and it's curated by a sexual abuse victim herself. And this has been taken forward to the government. So what I've done is a little bit of extra analysis that I'll talk about and how that might fit into the work that we're doing already on Childline. So yeah, let's move on to the background and then get into the meaty stuff. So disclosure, there are significant barriers for children when they're disclosing experiences of sexual abuse. The kinds of things that we know about barriers, the barriers that do exist, are that children tend not to disclose to adults. They tend to disclose, if they do disclose, to same age peers, or are more likely to trust same age peers. And this might be legitimate, a legitimate fear of having trust in adults, because they might be the people who are abusing the children. So if children distrust adults, how are adults supposed to respond to their disclosures? So that presents particular problems. So children's voices in relation to their own abuse might be obscured or silenced. Like, they might not either be able to make disclosures, might not feel comfortable about making disclosures, and the kinds of disclosures that they make might not be the ones that they mean to make, because they don't feel uncomfortable with talking to adults about their experiences. And what this does is limits access. It creates a significant barrier to practitioners to be able to see what disclosures from children look like. And this makes it quite hard to get access to these so authentic and empirical disclosures of abuse made by children in their own voices. And if we do have these, or access to the disclosures, what we have is the ability to make more effective responses to children's concerns during disclosure, or what they feel, think, know about their own abuse. And so our interest is in trying to understand how children choose to disclose using Childline. So Childline is a self-selected asynchronous support forum. It exists there as an anonymous site for children to use as and when they want to. There is no real adult intervention. So yeah, it's children talking in their own language about their own experiences of abuse. And so what we want to do is interpret the relationships between linguistic choices and disclosures relating to different kinds of abuse. So what kinds of language do children use to talk about different kinds of abuse? And then, well, in our work, we're talking actively with Childline to provide practicable insights to practitioners. So how might we be able to facilitate more effective disclosures of abuse? So that's just a bit of the background. What we do is pursue this one central research question, which is what language is used by young people when they make disclosures of abuse. Really quite broad, but it's quite an effective one, one that allows us to do quite a broad amount of work. And so what we've done is two studies. One is about the language of reports of domestic abuse, and one is about comparing language in reports of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. So I'll talk a bit about those two studies now. So these two studies, they are related to the Childline message boards. So you'll see some actions here on the right. I've put a little fancy GIF in here to show you how the category and topic kind of system of the Childline message boards work. And all the message boards are arranged around these topics and categories. So if you make a post to Childline, it has to exist in a topic or category. Now, you'll see on the right-hand side that when we look at study 2, so this study over here, there are boards that exist already for emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and physical abuse. But there is no board for domestic abuse. And as we've seen during COVID-19, it's always been a problem. But the kinds of reports and the focus on domestic abuse has been quite heightened. It's been quite acute. So, but there's nowhere for children, specifically on this board at least, to go to seek advice about domestic abuse. So what we've had to do is make an educated guess about where most talk about domestic abuse might happen on Childline, on the Childline website, in the message boards, by looking at how posts might distribute across different categories and topics. So what I went away and did was use a bit of web scraping software, the kind of stuff that I'm interested in, building little web scrapers and things to get hold of lots of texts. Was to go to the categories, or go to Childline, have a look at the categories, using these search terms on the bottom left-hand side. So the kinds of words that might be used in reports or disclosures of domestic abuse might be the co-occurrence of words like domestic and abuse in a post, domestic violence, family and abuse, home and violence, for example. So if and when these posts occurred with the co-occurrence of these terms, we picked them out. We could see that there was a particular concentration in posts to the categories of bullying, abuse and keeping safe, and home and school. So these categories tended to attract posts that had mention of these two terms in them. And then we did that the same for topics. So we looked at topics as well. We saw that the most posts were found in these post topics, which was emotional abuse, sexual abuse, home and family, and physical abuse. So essentially what I went away and did was scraped everything from all of those different topics that exist in those categories. This is all with the consent of Childline, and Childline are all aware of it, and they're quite happy for us to go away and do it. All the ethical considerations mentioned before about researcher and the participant safety, we've very much we've done our due diligence. So you'll see here on the left-hand side, we've got 4 subcorpora. On the right-hand side, we just exclude one of those subcorpuses, home and family, just to look at emotional, sexual and physical abuse. And now I'll just talk about study 1 first and then move on to study 2. So study 1, we're interested in children's disclosures of domestic abuse. So we've done our educated guess, found a lot of posts and where the language and disclosures might exist. But what we found when we started looking at the data, so this one on the left, there's about 3,500 posts, 3,200. In there was only 9 posts that made a direct reference to domestic abuse, use the words domestic plus a wildcard, or abuse, or abus plus a wildcard, somewhere as collocates in a post. So some kind of direct reference to domestic abuse. Only 9 posts we found. So explicit reference to domestic abuse was really, really uncommon, and possibly something that we might expect if children don't have access to a board that's called domestic abuse, and also might just not have the language of domestic abuse to talk about experiences that they're having in the house. Can they call domestic abuse if they don't have the language to call domestic abuse? So what we were interested then was to look at less explicit references to domestic abuse or domestic violence, which is really difficult to identify if you don't have specific lexical indicators to find them. So what we did was employed corpus methods, broadened the horizons of corpus, to drill down into the corpus and to have a little bit of a deeper look at what was going on in the language. So we did some really simple frequency stuff. You'll see 4 frequency word lists on the left-hand side. We had a simple word list, a word list with stop words removed, a lemma list, so a lemmatized version of the corpus, and then a lemmatized version of the corpus with those open class those closed class grammatical words removed as well. What we found in these frequent word lists where there is the kind of content words in there, the kind of social actors that I talked about. You'll see that on the very right-hand side, the lemma, stop words removed, mum is the most frequent lexical word in there. So the kind of social actors that are in there are to do with parents. We've got mum, we've got dad, we've got parent. So the social actors that I mentioned are parents. So what we did, thinking about domestic abuse, so a child, if they are experiencing domestic abuse, it might be to do with caregivers or adults in their life. What we did was, and this isn't perfect, it's not the be all and end all of the study, there's more work for us to do here, but what we did was extracted reference to both mum and dad, and asked the question how the children discuss relationships with and between parents. So using this as a starting point. And that enabled us to downsample from 3,200 posts to about 866. And then we read those posts to find whether there was some kind of description of abuse or conflict between parents. And that gave us a downsampled domestic abuse corpus. Once we had that downsampled corpus, we were able to do something using frequency word lists again. So you'll just see here on the left-hand side, we have a frequency word list where we just looked at all the words in those in the domestic abuse corpus. And what we found in here was a certain grouping that we could put some verbs into. So verbs indicating mental processes, where if anybody's doing systemic functional linguistics, Halliday and stuff, if you have a mental verb, there's a center who is sensing something. And we have these mental clauses where we might have some kind of way into the young person's perspective. So if somebody is making a disclosure, what do they think? What do they feel? What do they want? What do they know? And these are all features that might be, well, we might expect in disclosures, or we might expect in some kind of report. So we decided to have a look into these and ask this question. We're only going to look at feel because we've only got so much time. But what do young people feel about domestic abuse? And what we found was that kind of, well, we looked at collocates of the word feel, and we have a collocate list here. We probably might expect that young people might feel bad. We've got words highlighted on the left in red: bad, guilty, alone, lonely, sorry, happy. But we see that young people feel bad. And when they feel bad, they feel exploited. So she had a go at me, or she has a go at me and tries to make me feel bad. This is a report of a mother making a child feel bad, where there's other conflicts happening in the home. Children feeling bad when they're concerned or protecting others. My family aren't the most well off, so now I feel really bad. So this might be something to do with financial issues in the home. So is there possibly some relationship between domestic abuse and financial hardships? Children feeling bad because they lack support. So it makes me feel bad because I can't talk to anyone anymore. So this feeling of possibly isolation. So that brings us on to words like alone and lonely. So when domestic abuse is happening, do children feel isolated? He scares me sometimes. I feel alone. Why won't my mum help me? So a child feeling scared of a male caregiver, the dad, who's being abusive in the home, not being able to talk to anyone. I have no one to talk to and feel completely alone. So not knowing who to disclose to, or no access to possibly an adult or a friend or somebody friendly whom the child might be able to talk to and relate their experiences to. And we'll just go through a couple more of these terms, then move on to the second study. Feeling guilty, so children feeling guilty about the abusive situation itself. I remember so much and I feel guilty, and perceived role in the abuse as well. So I feel so guilty about what happened, so I cannot tell her. Children feeling guilty for abuse that they haven't inflicted or they've been witness to. Children feeling sorry, so feeling sorry for another person. I do feel sorry for my mum. So these feelings of guilt, where if there's abuse happening in the home, the child might not be able to act on it or change the situation, have no power to change the situation, so they might feel guilty about their lack of power. Children feeling depressed. So yeah, we might expect these kinds of things. So he is making me feel low, unwanted and depressed. My mum has been really making me feel depressed and angry with myself. So these kind of emotional effects of domestic abuse and the fallout. But there are these two words which are the least frequent in the list, better and happy. Semantically positive words, but what happens in the text is we have the negation all the time of happy. So I just feel I can never be happy. I feel like she's never happy with me. I don't feel happy anymore. So children being, again, feeling bad, but not happy as a way of talking about feeling bad. And feeling concerned for parents. So lots of these reported feelings are largely related to some centre, usually the child, experiencing some kind of negative emotion in relation to domestic abuse. This is something that we probably would expect. But what we've got here is the ways of looking at how children express those things in their own terms, in a way which they choose to express in their own disclosures. So what we're going to do next is, in some future research, is look at and explore more quantitatively who the centres are, and have a look at more of those different mental clauses and see what maybe associated causes and phenomena are with those feelings and those mental processes. So that's our first study. The second study is to do with looking at emotional, physical and sexual abuse. And I'll have to ask for a bit of forgiveness for using these Venn diagrams. I quite like them. They're a little bit rubbish, but they work. Yeah, so we've got emotional, physical, sexual abuse, these three different corpora in the middle. What we've done is cut out anything that intersects between those corpora on the left, and on the right hand side, we only look for things that intersect always between those corpora. And what we're going to look at is the top 200 open class lemma from each of those corpora. So or the subcorpora. So top 200 open class lemma from emotional abuse, for example. On the left hand side, we'd only be interested in what occurs only in the top 200 words from that corpus. So when we look at set differences here, so anything that only exists in one of the subcorpuses and or subcorpora and is not intersecting any way with any of the other corpora results in this word list or these word lists. So let's have a look at emotional abuse. Emotional abuse, we obviously get words to do with statements of negative emotions. We get things like anxiety, mental, and that kind of associated with mental health, depression, happy. So we get this, again, negation of happy here. So we get things like quantity, many, constantly, whenever, whole. So if we have reports of things about emotional abuse or feelings of negative emotions, we get this kind of constantly and whenever, this kind of perpetual time of negative emotions coming up. We get things like, again, thinking about these process types, we get ignore and argue and yell, these kind of verbal process types. Ignorance, or ignoring someone, is maybe an action which is an inaction, not talking to somebody. But then when we do have verbal process, we have argue and yell. So these aggressive kinds of verbal instances. And then we get things like act, change, and nice. So you'll see them highlighted in blue there. I'll have to speed up in a second. But often, often in the report, if children talk about somebody acting in a way, so they might act nice, but then they will change. And there's this really interesting report of somebody, well, this idea that if somebody's bullying somebody or there's constantly changing, you might have somebody being really nice at one point, but then changing the behavior and putting a child in a state of imbalance. So they might be being emotionally abused because they're constantly being subjected to different states of play, let's say. Physical abuse, again, we might have things that we would expect, but what we're doing here is we're finding specific words in children's own terms in their own disclosures. So we get these highlighted in orange: kill, beat, drag, fight, punch, slap, step, kick. These physical processes, so material processes, violence, words to do with violence. We get words to do with the body, so arm, leg, and hair. So we get things to do with pulling hair, and we get things to do with kicking in the leg, punching in the arm. And those actions tend to result in things like bruising and marking. So children reporting that they have bruises and marks. And then finally, sexual abuse. I'll have to whiz through these final little bits. Sexual abuse, we have references to age, so we have numeric references, and these are all things that only occur in sexual abuse. The sexual abuse subcorpus, we get references to age, we get references to different kinds of physical violence: assault, bit, force, hug, kiss, struggle, touch, rape. And then we have these mental processes, these mental things happen with confused memory, flashback, nightmare, and understand. So these kind of longer term reports of mental anguish, which we don't find in emotional abuse, but do exist in sexual abuse, which might be, well, special to those kinds of disclosures. And then intersecting, again, we find these really prototypical verbs, these mental process types. We get things like need and want, which are desiderative. We get cognitive words like know, remember, think, and believe, and then emotive words like feel, love, and hate. So if you've got these things which are always intersecting all these different corpora, all these different kinds of abuse, maybe that leads us into being able to analyze narrative disclosure, and gives us a kind of firmer footprint for, if these are words that are associated with disclosure, let's have a look at them and see how those words are enacted in different subcorpora. So yeah, I've gone a little bit too long into that, but I'm still going to give you some extra analysis. I'll finish very soon, Robbie, I do promise. So a little bit of extra analysis. We've looked at sexual abuse in Childline. The government have announced this review. There is another website called Everyone's Invited. Very similar process, went and scraped all the posts from there. So you'll see on the left the corpus that we had for the Childline work that I've just described. Get rid of everything else apart from sexual abuse, and just looking at the posts that were made to Everyone's Invited. They basically, that website exists for reports of sexual abuse, essentially, and that has over 3 times the size of the Childline corpus. So in terms of tokens and in terms of posts, it does skew a little bit older. So it's therefore, it was set up by a young woman who went to university and had an experience of sexual assault at university, and she invited people from schools and universities to make their own testimonies, she calls them. And so, yeah, we essentially treated these two corpora in the same way as I've just treated the 3 different subcorpora from Childline. And so we took the top 200 open class lemma again and compared them. And so you'll see some of the features that were coming out in the report of sexual abuse in Childline coming out again. So these words in yellow, or these terms in yellow to do with age. You'll see that the younger ages are in Childline, so over here on the left. So 10, 12, 2, 3, 6, 7. Ages are skewing much younger than they are for everyone invited, where we get 16, 13, 14, 15, and age is much more prototypically, it's kind of in the middle there. So that's something to investigate. Something that was interesting in terms of the kinds of physical violence verbs. So hug is here on the left-hand side with Childline. So maybe this is more associated with, I don't know, somebody hugging somebody that has been unwanted physical contact, which then leads to sexual abuse. But in the middle here, which we have, which is shared between all different reports, is force, grab, kiss, pull, push, rape, and touch. So these things which are maybe more prototypical of disclosures of sexual abuse. Something which, again, may be a feature of age. Here is the verbs of finger, fuck, and grope, which might be indicators that because the people disclosing are older, the kinds of verbs might represent basically understanding the acts that are happening to somebody or to themselves in a way where they have the language to talk about those sexual acts in a way that's representative of their age and experience. Children might not know what to finger is, whereas somebody who's over 16 might do. And then again, in the middle, we have these orange words, so feel, know, need, remember, think, want. So again, these features of narrative disclosure are all there. So yeah, that's just a little bit of extra analysis to tack on top. So I'll give you a few conclusions, and then if there's any questions, I would love to hear them. So as has been mentioned already, ethics, it's extremely sensitive, this work. It's a really, really sensitive topics, and some of the worst stuff that I work with, it's something I really have to step away from. It's not very nice to work with at all. So there are features of participants of research and wellbeing that we're really thinking about, and Childline are involved, so they know what we're doing, and me and Sam talk about it quite a lot to make sure that we know we're on track and it doesn't send us too loopy. There are some issues to do with the work. All the posts are anonymous. We can't verify anybody, and nor do we try to. The use of the platforms, we don't know what their ages are. We don't know whether the event's disclosed. We can't verify any of it essentially, but it is there, and we kind of have to trust that the disclosures are what they say they are. In terms of our research questions, we've got what language is used by young people when they make disclosures. Well, we're finding things to do with mental and verbal processes, potentially features that we might expect. It all makes sense, narrative disclosure. But we're also finding topical lemma, so evidence of common lemma across disclosure types. And we're finding that is potentially context dependent, and we would expect it would be context dependent. So that brings us to that point of language use is functional. Disclosures are complicated and situated. I don't think we're going to find some kind of way to train some, I don't know, artificial intelligence to find and pick out disclosures of sexual abuse when children aren't going to sites to make those disclosures specifically. But this is where linguistics comes in handy. And then finally, future work. So this is our initial stages of research. We're focusing on young people's perspectives and providing empirical linguistic understandings of children's experience of abuse, which we might not otherwise get access to. And we have some opportunities here to provide, use those empirically formed findings to inform what practitioners do and facilitate young person-centered disclosures of abuse. So we've got a chapter coming out. You'll see all these slides anyway. So there's some references, but if you've got any questions, I'd love to hear them. I'm sorry for going over time.
Thank you, Mark. That was a really fascinating talk. We've had a couple of questions come in on the chat, and then we'll take a short break before we continue with the program. So we had a question from Lucia. Did you consider any spelling alternatives, like mummy, mom, etc., and any other relations, family relations, grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc.?
Yeah, those do come up. It was very hard to talk about any of that in well, should have been 20 minutes, in 28 minutes, sorry. Yeah, we haven't looked for those just yet. Yeah, we have considered them. Things do come up with boyfriends. So for example, mum and boyfriend does come up, and partners, so dad and girlfriend, for example. It does come up, but what we did as a first step was just to look at mum and dad. So that was where the meat of the disclosures were, and we'll look at that in the future.
Thank you. And we have another question from Samantha. Perhaps you'd like to come on and ask this one yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't know if you can see the question mark, but it's about ABE interviews. So those that are done for criminal proceedings with children, so they don't have to give evidence live in court, but they are interviewed by specialists outside of the courtroom because of their age and because of their vulnerability. And I was just thinking it'd be really useful to, like you've done with the childline corpus and the everyone's invited corpus, to look at the kind of language that's used in those ABE interviews and analyze them in the same way. Do you know if you're able to get anonymized access to those interviews, or whether they're completely inaccessible? I have a feeling they might be completely inaccessible, but I thought I'd ask anyway.
Yeah, I'd imagine they might be behind closed doors, but it's something. Thank you for the suggestion. I'll see if I can get access to them, and if it's legal to get access to them, I'm not too sure.
Neither am I. I have a feeling they won't be, but they'd be a really useful set of data, I think.
Yeah, I think, yeah, very nice suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Once again, fantastic presentation. And of course, if you do think of any other questions about this or any of the other talks so far, please do feel free to post in the chat. And it's now time for a short break. We'll be starting again in just under 15 minutes at 3:45, and we'll be moving away from forensic linguistics to start exploring other areas of applied linguistics. So we'll see you again very shortly at 3:45 for Anna Chermakova's talk. Thank you, everyone.